As well as being a distraction to business, the throwdown has been, I think, useful in many ways. I'd be naive to think that it hasn't raised my profile in the ceramics world, because I think it's been a show that's been very useful to the ceramics scene. Really, I think it's encouraged people to get back into clay if they've not worked with clay for a while. It's encouraged new people to the discipline, and I think it's put ceramics into the front rooms of 4 million people on a weekly basis, which has to be beneficial. I think certainly my role on the show, I remained under the radar enough that it's raised my profile with people who knew about it, but I'm not walking down the street or going to Tesco's and people are asking for photographs, which is great because I do not court that kind of element. It's certainly not something I expected to be involved with as a potter. When I got involved with ceramics, it's not something that was even on my radar. And that said, it's been a really interesting learning experience. Learning about that kind of world and being immersed in it for a long period of time has been interesting. I've met people from all sorts of different industries that I probably never would have encountered otherwise. And yeah, I'm sure I've sold pots because of it. And certainly when it's showing on the TV, there's more social media going around, and I'm sure that's been beneficial. All of that said, it's very stressful. It's great fun. I mean, really great fun. Being part of a team of people that are all incredibly good at what they do. I mean, I think that's something that I'd sort of not necessarily been part of. I mean, everybody's a freelancer and they're all only there because they're very good at what they do. And so being part of a team of people like that has been really, really great. Watching the contestants as part of the throwdown has been mind-blowing, because actually realising what is possible. I mean, we push every element of the process. And I mean, over the last 13, 14 years with the tiles, we've had tight deadlines and we've pushed clay to its limits, pushed process to its limits. So I'm kind of well used to doing that, but it's my own work, and actually sort of pushing what are essentially kind of amateur makers to their limits, to the limits of the process, to the limits of the material, has been mind-blowing. I mean, just seeing what's possible, it just makes you feel like anything is possible, because I think we all very easily sort of set barriers up, or we get fed these rules that you can do this, you can't do that, you do this like this, you do this like that, but actually to sort of see people just find their way and make things that you would never imagine making, and in timescales you would never give yourself, in a very sort of strange environment, very pressured environment. It's mind-blowing to watch. It's been really interesting, and obviously the lovely thing about being part of the show and not watching the end result is you feel you're watching it in real time, so you're watching these people develop week to week and gain confidence, and yeah, it's inspiring. It's really inspiring watching the potters and what they achieve. It's amazing, and I'm just there to try and make sure that things don't blow up. But obviously I only ever work with what they give me, so it's not like I'm in any way shaping the result. That's down to sort of how they how they approach the challenges or not. I throw the basic forms. A lot of the forms and the rim details and things are based around chimney pots. So I was looking at a lot of old traditional chimney pot manufacturers, things like that. And again, that's to sort of cement it in British industry, I guess. And then I leave them to harden off for maybe a day, a couple of days, depending on how warm the environment is. And then I emboss them using wooden tools of varying sizes, which relate to finished sizes. I then either do watercolours, or more recently I've been drawing digitally straight into an iPad. So I do all of the drawings, and then I use a company in Stoke-on-Trent that produce digital transfers to order. They're then cut up, placed in water. They're all water float transfers, floated off and then applied to a fully glazed pot. It was Ceramic Art London was the first time I made this work for 2016. And I was literally outside Ceramic Art London, and I'd made all this work. I'd interviewed my mum and dad, and I was waiting in the lay-bys. He was in the van waiting to help me unload and everything else on the setup day, and I got a call from my mum, and she'd just found my dad dead. So I set up the show. The whole show was just a blur, but it was one of those things where actually it was probably a good bubble to be in. It was heart-wrenching because I was talking about my family and my dad and the history of the pieces for the whole weekend, and people were just wanting to engage with that, and I'd made this book with pictures of me and my mum and my dad, and really it was just tough, But in hindsight, it was really positive because actually you don't get that opportunity to discuss things like that in such a positive way. And actually everybody that comes to a show like that is really open to what you're doing and they want to learn about you and you. This jug is a fairly early piece, so a lot of this is starting to think about some of the themes that I was looking to explore. For example, it's got HMS Victory here, which is one of the images which is almost the most incongruous really on here, because everything else tends to relate either directly to the Empire or Britain or Guyana, where my dad was from, or Wales, where my mum was from. But HMS Victory was something that I visited. My dad was stationed at HMS Dryad, so I was brought up in Emsworth and I used to go to the historic dockyards all the time. Victory was a ship that I visited on a number of occasions, and it was only through reading a book by David Olusoga recently that I realised that a fifth of the crew on HMS Victory were from the colonies. And it was just one of those things that had been missed from my experience of the ship, and something that I thought would have been fairly relatable as a young person. All of these are verses from the James Thompson poem Rule Britannia. That's all on there because I was in the studio actually listening to Radio 4, and they were talking about the Women's Institute, and they were saying that Jerusalem wasn't really a fitting anthem for the Women's Institute anymore, and they were talking about potentially other songs that could be used, and Rule Britannia was one of them. And I thought, actually, because my dad was in the Royal Marines, but he was a Royal Marines bandsman, so he was a musician. I used to go to all of his functions and engagements as a kid, and I would hear him play things like Rule Britannia. In fact, I've got a record in my collection which is him in Canada playing Rule Britannia, bizarrely. This is the Demerara River, which is really why Guyana in South America was so important to the empire. Guyana is on the Caribbean Sea, but it's landlocked because it's part of South America. But the Demerara River extends about 70 miles inland, and it's a deep water channel, deep enough to take ships in. So it was the one place that they had the protection of the estuary, and they could essentially drop off slaves and pick up sugar from this very fertile growing grounds which were on the banks of the river. So it was fought for between the Dutch and the English an awful lot, and changed hands regularly, but it was at the time the finest sugar in the world, really, Demerara sugar, and it became one of the biggest trading ports because of it in the Caribbean. We've got the Welsh dragon, and that's because it's sort of a familiar emblem to me, really. And my mum is Welsh, and it's just a symbol that I used to see an awful lot, because there's a sort of a patriotism that Welsh people have that is unlike anybody else in any other sort of regional part of the UK. So it had to be on there, and it acknowledges my mum's history. But she went into the army as well. So we've got the Women's Royal Army Corps emblem here. And further down we've got the Royal Marines emblem here. And that, again, that's to sort of signify my parents' working career, really. My mum was in the army, stationed in Germany, and my dad was in the Royal Marines Band for nearly 30 years. My great-granddad, was a prospector out in South America. They call them pork knockers. And he would lead expeditions into the Guyanese interior to look for gold and diamonds. And I mean, it's all a fairly clouded history. We don't know exactly what was happening and what did and what didn't. And it seems to be the case that he said this, she said that. But the end result is that a diamond was found, and the two American chaps who were sort of part of this expedition, who I presume were funding it, actually split the proceeds quite generously with my great-granddad, and so he was able to buy a bakery and a shop and some property in Guyana. And then as independence came round, Guyana fell to bits politically, really. There's a lot of corruption in the government, and when it was sort of finally given independence, literally a lot of the assets, as it were taken out of the country, and it was left with nothing. In the lead up, there was a lot of violence on the streets, and my granddad made the decision to move over here because it was the early 50s, so there was still a sort of tail end of that call for a labour force to kind of help support Britain's economy really after the Second World War. He came over and worked on the buses, and he sent for the children gradually. So my dad, being the eldest son, he and his brother came first when he was 10. And then within a couple of years, my granddad passed away from cancer, and my dad was then sort of head of the household. So at 15, he joined the military to fund the household. And I think being a black 15-year-old in the military in the, late 60s, early 70s was probably quite a tough place to be.